I'm delighted to have the honour of following Lord Smith, succeeding Lord Smith in the same way that Henry VII succeeded Henry VIII. 7 years ago, because it was 7 years since Glasgow in Scotland won the honour of hosting the Commonwealth Games this year, after the initial exuberance of the decision passed, and I was thinking of somebody to chair the organising committee, aware that just about every major sporting event in recent history has run dramatically over budget. Most of them are on time, because actually you have to be on time in major sporting events, but virtually none of them had managed to stay within budget. And I was thinking of, is there anyone I can think of who has the ability to do what has proven to be improbable, if not impossible, in so many other places? And I alighted on the idea of Robert Smith to chair the organising committee, safe in the knowledge that he was such a substantial figure that if things did go over budget, then he would take the blame, and I would be, I would be safe and secure. Actually, he has achieved the near impossible. The Commonwealth Games will be within budget, much to my gratitude and no substantial relief, Robert. Robert has asked me to say that once the Games are over, he's available for consultancy at very reasonable rates across the Commonwealth if people want to know how to pull it off in future. But Robert, well done on that, because it is an extraordinary achievement for you and your committee. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all to the Commonwealth Games Business Conference. The Scottish Government is delighted to host this event in partnership with the UK Government. And Glasgow University, of course, is an entirely fitting venue. The 25,000 students in this university include more than 800 from Commonwealth countries out with these islands. And they're among the 9,000 Commonwealth students at Scottish universities. We are so delighted that each and every one of these 9,000 students has chosen to come and study in Scotland. Just as we are delighted to welcome you all, the delegates of this conference, and to greet the athletes and spectators from around the world for these Glasgow Commonwealth Games. Now, the university is also part of a tradition of educational excellence, which has deep roots in Scottish society. Glasgow University was founded in 1451. By the end of the 16th century, Scotland had 5 universities at a time when the rest of these islands had but 2. Now Glasgow is one of 5 Scottish universities in the world's top 200. That's more per head of population than any other country on the planet. And Scotland wasn't just a pioneer of university education. In the 16th and 17th centuries, we became the first society on earth to introduce universal free school education. Now, there are 2 things to think of about that. I mean, first, one of the things we're proud of in Scotland is that we invented a fair number of things. Our inventions include the condensed steam engine, the telephone, the fax machine, the television, the MRI scanner, penicillin, all the way through to Dolly the sheep. Actually, we invented the overdraft as well, although we don't talk about that quite as much. It was, however, the American historian Arthur Herman who asserted that Scotland's record of invention was such that we actually invented the modern world. Of course, we would be far, far too modest to make that claim ourselves, but that doesn't stop us repeating it when someone else says it. But the more interesting thing is the reason for that history of innovation. Of course, when I was a lad growing up in Linlithgow in central Scotland, I stumbled across the fact that Scotland seemed to have invented lots of stuff. And it was a while before I realised why that was. Because the 2 things are entirely connected. The reason that Scotland was the home and the land of invention is we invented the most important invention of all, which was the free universal education. Because it was the free universal education which allowed people to invent things, which gave people the platform, because light needs a window to enter a darkened room. Now, that tradition of innovation continues. The University of Glasgow plays a lead role in the innovation centre we've established for stratified medicine at Southern General Hospital, less than 3 miles from this spot. That centre examines data on how patients with different genetic makeups respond to different treatments by helping to find remedies for chronic conditions such as cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular illness. It's helping to tackle some of the world's major health challenges. That investment in the southern Glasgow hospitals amounts to £1,000 million of public direct investment. It is worth every penny, and the £18 million that the Chancellor is going to announce later today will be a welcome addition to the £1,000 million which has been invested. And another of the city's great universities, the University of Strathclyde, which happens to have had the wisdom of appointing me as a Professor of Economics. I just make that point, Principal, just in case any point in the future this crosses the mind of the University Court. But another of the great universities of this city, Strathclyde, is at the heart of ITRES, the city's renewable energy technology zone. It's one of the developments which has made Glasgow the preeminent centre for offshore wind research of Europe. While in Orkney, 300 miles to the north, there are more types of wave and tidal devices are being tested than any other location in the world. Now, James Watt's condensing steam engine helped to create the industrial age. Now Scotland is looking to lead the world into the low-carbon age. Or you could look at our digital and creative industries. The Glasgow School of Art has worked with Historic Scotland to create the finest digital scanning technology in the world. We have an initiative called the Scottish 10, but actually 5 of the World Heritage sites are in Scotland. The other 5 which have been digitalised through that technology around the world, including Mount Rushmore for the American government, the tombs of the Eastern Qing dynasty for the Chinese government, and through the Commonwealth, the Queen's Stepwell in northern India. The Sydney Opera House will have the benefits of digital technology developed in this city, so as that people around the world can do a walk through that great, wonderful Australian building. Of course, that digital expertise we're very proud of, but perhaps for most of the population of the planet, they're more familiar with Grand Theft Auto than they are with our digital scanning of historic buildings. But the two things, of course, are entirely interconnected. But the second thing about that tradition of education, beyond the innovation it fosters, is that education is seen as a public good in Scotland. We have recognised for centuries that we invest in education not because merely we're investing in individuals, important that is, not just for personal gain, but for the prosperity of the nation and the future of society. And that combination of public benefit and private gain is a key theme of this speech this morning. After all, the very word Commonwealth used to mean public benefit or public good. You still hear the phrase commonweal in Scotland. And so I'm going to look at how we balance competitiveness and cohesion, self-interest and solidarity, how we ensure that growth adds to the Commonwealth, the commonweal of society, as well as to the prosperity of individuals. And I'm going to start where you should start in a discussion of these matters with one of Glasgow University's most famous graduates. Adam Smith was Professor of Moral Philosophy here from 1752 till 1764. He wasn't obviously the Professor of Economics. He hadn't invented economics at that stage. He was the founder of the science of economics, so Adam Smith was the Professor of Moral Philosophy. He was a philosopher, and therefore it follows that his economic thought and the basis of the economic science which he developed has a profound ethical and moral dimension. Now, Adam Smith's work has often been misunderstood or misquoted because The Wealth of Nations, the book that is the bedrock of the modern science of economics, recognised self-interest as an important motivation. People have sometimes interpreted this as a Smith license to selfishness. But in The Wealth of Nations, Smith is clearly arguing that there's a social dimension to us all. Quote, "No society can be flourishing and happy of which the far greater part of its members are poor and miserable." Those who think that is a license or a creed of selfishness must have been reading the Penguin edition of The Wealth of Nations. And that social perspective that Smith developed is even clearer in his earlier and equally important work, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. The Theory of Moral Sentiments was a book based on Smith's lecture course at this university. There, Smith argues that the basis of our judgments is what he calls sympathy. Perhaps in the modern age we'd now call that empathy, in terms of our understanding and our ability to put ourselves in the position of others. So what Smith was actually arguing for was enlightened self-interest, a self-interest which recognises our responsibilities to and our feelings for other people. It recognised there are wider gains for the community as a whole, for the individual within that community, when society is strong and prosperous. Now, my argument is that all nations' enlightened self-interest is the guiding principle which enables us to combine fairness and prosperity at home and to engage with the wider world as a good global citizen. It is therefore the key to tackling the key national and indeed international challenges which we face. In recent decades, we've seen rising levels of inequality across almost all developed nations, but most notably in the United States of America and here in the United Kingdom. Professor Joseph Stiglitz is a Nobel laureate who sits on the Scottish Government's Council of Economic Advisers. He actually chaired Bill Clinton's Council of Economic Advisers, but here in Scotland we only allow Joe to be a member of our Council of Economic Advisers. Joe recently has written a book called The Price of Inequality. He points out there's a pretty overwhelming evidence that this growth in inequality is economically damaging in itself. It curbs the spending power of the majority of families and individuals. It reduces the ability of low-income families to contribute their talents, their skills, their innovation to the wider economy. And it also corrodes public trust and confidence. It corrodes confidence in government and public institutions, and it corrodes confidence in business. And these aspects, that confidence, that underpinning of confidence, is actually essential to the long-term success of a mixed economy. Now, Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, is addressing this conference tomorrow. He gave an excellent speech to the conference on inclusive capitalism in May, where Mark pointed out that, quote, unchecked market fundamentalism can devour the social capital essential for the long-term dynamism of capitalism itself. But despite that, we see too many governments using economic growth to cover some of the social costs of inequality, such as poor health outcomes, increased benefit payments, without recognising that inequality itself undermines the long-term sustainability of growth. They treat symptoms rather than tackle root causes. So one of the key issues that all nations face is how to restore and maintain that sense of social cohesion, of solidarity, of fairness, which enables capitalism to flourish in the long term. After all, it's easier to mobilise a society behind economic growth if that growth is seen to benefit all of society. So that's why when the Scottish Government came to office in 2007, we focused and decided to focus all government activity on one purpose: to create opportunities for all of Scotland to flourish by raising the rate of sustainable economic growth. It's not about growth alone, it's about sustainable growth for a purpose: the well-being and happiness of individuals and communities in every part of this country. Now, that purpose is reflected in policy. We have implemented a living wage within the public sector in Scotland, which is approximately 20% higher than the statutory minimum wage. That policy is about fairness, of course, but it also promotes individual well-being, builds economic confidence, and creates a sense of solidarity across society. I'm pleased to say that many of our great companies in the private sector have now followed that example. We provide extensive support for businesses through our enterprise agencies. We have established the most competitive business tax system in the UK. We are an open and highly competitive economy, but we recognise that nobody lives through business alone. We understand that good schools and hospitals and public transport and parklands, a vibrant culture and strong communities, all of these contribute to social well-being and therefore contribute to economic success. Now, I mentioned Scotland's view of education as a social good. This government has re-established free university and college tuition precisely to preserve that principle. We are currently working to improve vocational education at schools and our colleges. In all of this work, our intent is to build a stronger society, but we're also intent on giving Scotland a more competitive economy. A report from the Office of National Statistics last month demonstrated Scotland as the most highly educated workforce in Europe. That's an incredible advantage for Scottish businesses looking to recruit or for overseas companies looking to invest. and we want to do more for the future. Society across Western Europe, indeed many developed societies across the world, have what they call a demographic time bomb. A time bomb which is explained as the population, the working age population, is going down relative to the elderly population. And yet, some of the solutions to that are easily within our own hands. We have the ability, and we've just recently touching 70% participation of women in the workforce in Scotland. A very high level in terms, in Western European terms, but still 5 or 6% behind the Scandinavian economies. The provision of universal childcare, in the same way as people have access to primary education, would transform the ability of more women to re-enter more quickly the workforce, and in itself is a partial solution to that demographic challenge in terms of rebalancing the workforce between the active participants and the dependency ratio. We have the ability, if we so choose in this country, to allow and to invite and to encourage some of the students whose human capital we raise over 3 or 4 years to stay and live and work and participate in our society. Currently, for some reason which I've never been able to understand, it's thought to be a good policy to kick them out of the country after we've raised their human capital so well over such a period of time. We have the ability to do this if we so choose, and therefore we should so choose as quickly as possible. The answers to these questions lie within our hands. Now, the Commonwealth Games demonstrate that approach to growth. From the very beginning, we've worked to ensure they benefit as many people as possible. As Robert Smith says, this Commonwealth Games won't just be the biggest cultural and sporting celebration that Scotland has ever seen, although they most certainly will be that. They're also a catalyst for improving people's well-being. We're establishing 150 community sporting hubs across the country, a nationwide sporting legacy to complement the wonderful facilities here in the city of Glasgow. We've ensured, as Robert said, that the Athletes' Village will be used for affordable housing, that transport investment meets the long-term needs of Glasgow and Scotland, that the land being regenerated includes parks as well as business parks. We've made business opportunities accessible to local companies. One of the Commonwealth Games Committee's proudest boasts is that almost 70% of all contracts have gone to local businesses based here in Scotland. And we ensure that the Games create employment and training opportunities for thousands of young people. As a result, the legacy of this Commonwealth Games won't just be the magnificent physical infrastructure that all of you will see as you go through this city. The legacy of this Games, the real legacy, will be the impact on people, the human legacy, as well as the infrastructure legacy. Thousands of people will be more active, more skilled, more engaged with their communities than they would be if these Games had never come to Scotland. And of course, the Games will have another effect. When we finish the speech, you're going to see a video, a brilliant moments video for the Commonwealth Games and for the Ryder Cup. 2014 is an astonishing year for Scotland. It's a wonderful time to live here or to visit here. It's not just the year of the Commonwealth Games and the Ryder Cup, it's a year of homecoming, when we welcome the world to Scotland with hundreds of events taking place around the country. As a result, Scotland has never had a higher profile in the international stage. That's great news for jobs and investment in Scotland. Our enterprise agencies today are releasing reports which demonstrate their huge success in attracting investment, creating and safeguarding more than 7,000 jobs in the last year. The value of research and development projects, a particular priority, has almost doubled. And we know from other figures that inward investment in Scotland is already at a 16-year high, and international visits to Scotland increased by 13% over the last year, and that's even before all of you arrived for this conference. Now, we're hoping to build on that success. For example, we've launched a sustained effort in recent years to increase our international exports. However, during that time, although the value of the exports to the Commonwealth has grown, it has risen by less than our exports to other parts of the planet. So we want to use 2014 to build and reinvigorate trading ties across the Commonwealth and around the world. Increasing trade volumes will, of course, bring benefits to all parties. Our Minister for External Affairs and International Development, Hamza Yousaf, is chairing a panel discussion on trade as a driver for development and economic growth later on. And of course, all of this work to boost trade, to raise our profile, fits in with Scotland's history as well as with our future. We have always been an outward-looking people. I was reading recently about the first Scot to win a Commonwealth gold medal. He was a marathon runner called Duncan Wright at the very first Games in Hamilton in Canada. And he attributed his win in part to the support he got from the crowd. A journalist at the time said, "Hamilton is noted as being a city with a preponderance of Scots in its population. The Hampden roar had nothing on the tremendous wave of cheering which arose as Duncan ran round the stadium." Well, it's good that 84 years on, we'll be able to give a genuine Hampden roar to the athletes of Canada and all the other Commonwealth nations. And of course, the Scots of Hamilton are just one example of the mark made by Scots around the world, from Dunedin in New Zealand to Delhi in India, from Blantyre in Malawi to Banff in Canada. And just as Scots have settled over the globe, we are now welcoming people from around the world to study, to live and work in Scotland. We hope that many, many more will do so in future. And that exchange of peoples reinforces something that all of us recognised. Just as individuals within a society have obligations to each other, so too do countries within the international community. And so a further reason why we welcome Scotland's enhanced profile in this year of 2014 is it might enable us to make a bigger contribution on the international stage. That is something we are extremely keen to do. And to give one last and but very significant example, it's difficult to hold a conference about major economic challenges and opportunities facing countries across the globe without mentioning climate change. It's perhaps the greatest economic, social, moral issue facing our planet. It raises profound issues of fairness between nations and between generations. Scotland has for several years attempted to set an example. In 2007, the Scottish Parliament unanimously passed the most ambitious climate change legislation anywhere in the world, committing us to a 42% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions between 1990 and 2020. As part of that, as I mentioned earlier, we have championed renewable technology, developing technologies which we hope can be applied across the planet as we make them commercial and sustainable for the future. But we have become increasingly aware that our actions cannot be confined to policies which reduce the impact of climate change in the future. After all, the developed world, climate change causing substantial inconvenience, occasional tragedy. In the developing world, it's already causing enduring crisis and unremitting chaos. In 2011, the Scottish Government established the world's first climate justice fund, recognising that countries which have benefited from carbon emissions in the past should help those affected by climate change now. That fund is currently helping communities affected by climate change in Malawi and Zambia, for example, by improving access to clean water, educating and empowering women so that they can play a leading role in organising society and community. Now, that change, that fund, is tiny, small, in the overwhelming scale of the problem. But it is a powerful commitment from a nation determined to uphold the best traditions of its past. It's just one way where we can look to promote the values of the Commonwealth Charter, including democracy, human rights, gender equality, and sustainable development. In one of the villages helped by the fund, a village called Bondo, we have worked with partners, including the European Union and the UK government. That funding has contributed to a small-scale hydroelectric power scheme, meaning that babies are now born and safely in a well-lit room. Previously, doctors and nurses had to work by candlelight. Mobile phones can be recharged, connecting the community to the wider world, giving access to services such as banking. The town actually has installed a communal television so that villagers could watch the World Cup. Unfortunately, of course, Malawi didn't qualify for the World Cup. Even more unfortunately, neither did Scotland. Even more unfortunately still, out of the 5 Commonwealth teams who did qualify, 4 didn't make it out of the group stages. So well done to Nigeria, who did. But it is an example, that project, which makes a real difference to real people's lives. It's put technology to the service of the enduring principles of international solidarity. That's principle of enlightened self-interest, developed in this university by Adam Smith. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I began this speech by talking about Adam Smith. I want to end by quoting Robert Burns. Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet, who was born when Smith was a lecturer here in Glasgow. When the Scottish Parliament was reconvened in 1999, the members all sang Burns's great international anthem of democracy. A man's a man. For all that and all that, it's coming yet for all that man to man the world o'er shall brothers be for all that. Over the next 2 weeks, Glasgow and Scotland will welcome sisters and brothers from the world o'er for the Commonwealth Games. We do so as a nation which has already contributed much to the world and wants to contribute more in the future. A country keen to build partnership with friends and allies from across the planet, one which promotes fairness and prosperity at home and abroad, and one where we value sustainable growth as a means of individual fulfilment, of course, but also as an aid to the public good, the social realm, the Commonwealth, the common weal of our nation and of all nations. Thank you very much.